I got a pretty good response from the first video of this, so it's time for Tartarian Tales 2. And this is going to be showing the book called Russia, a complete historical account of all the nations which compose that empire. Volume 2. And this is a great book as it has a lot of stories about the tribes and different hordes, Mongol hordes and whatnot that made up Russia in the early days in Tartaria. And there's talks a lot about the empire, different tribes, different leaders, different khans, different ancient thoughts, and a lot of different things. So I think you all will like this. It is pretty cool, a lot of interesting, less of a story, more of kind of just like some facts and some different observations. But let me know what you think again, and we'll keep piecing it together. Check out, this is the cover, and this is the contents, which is pretty interesting. So there's a lot of different stories in here. I'll probably go to more of these as time goes on. But it's time to go for it, and pardon my pronunciation. Some of these words are tough, and the F's look like S's, so it gets a little bit confusing. But bear with me, and here we go. Tartar Nations. The numerous original stocks of Tartar nations settled in the Empire of Russia and its environs are distinguished by different names, one while they are called Tartars, another while Turuks, Turks, or Turkomans, but the three latter denominations are the most frequent. The Tartars who have written the history of their nation derive them from a certain Turuk or Turk and Tatar, his grandson. Among these writers, Abu Ghafi Baya Dorkin is the most worthy of credit, and according to him, Turuk is the father and founder of this people. One of his numerous grandsons was Tatar, a great hero and the establisher of some considerable hordes. This proud and haughty people have since imagined that the name of Turuk and Tatar must necessarily communicate to all that hear them the idea of master and sovereign. The Yakuts have even placed the hero Tatar among their gods. In process of time, however, the Tartars were not so blinded by their patriotic arrogance as to hinder them from perceiving that several among the predominant nations of those parts had an idea very different of the famous name Tatar, and that some even went so far as to use the term in a humiliating sense. The Chinese, not less haughty than themselves, confer upon all their neighbors, whether Tartars or Mongols, the injurious name of Tata or Taj, a word derived from the Chinese verb tatana, which signifies to assemble in troops, generally in a bad sense, for the purposes of ravage, plunder, or rebellion. Among the Finnish nations, the Tartars in general bear the name of Snas. Ancient history commonly confounds the Tartars with the Mongols, and it is probable that this error has arisen from the proximity of the habitations of these two people. The Tartars have been alternately subjects and allies of the Mongols. Khan Chingwais, the founder of the Tartarian Monarchy, was by birth a Mongol, made his first excursions with Mongols, and in all his subsequent expeditions had always a great many of them in the numerous armies of Tartars which he commanded, with whom the Mongols were so mixed that in time they lost both their name and their original language. The Tartars themselves go so far as to maintain that Tartar and Mongol, the fathers of these two nations, were twin brothers. Nevertheless, these people have each of them a language absolutely different from the other, and if one may judge from the majority, the very style of their countenance has no resemblance. Even intermediate races are very distinguishable among them, who seem to be the link by which they are connected. Of this fort are the Tartars of Kuznetsk, the Yakuts, and though this appearance may have been occasioned by the consequence of wars, when the people made this mixture, either by the intermarriages of the conquerors amongst the vanquished, or by the violations of their women, the Tartar Hordes are made up of the ancient inhabitants of Great Tartary, as the geographers call it, that is, that great extent of territory between the mountains of Siberia and the East Indies, from the river of Ural to Mongolia, one part of which is now comprehended in Sungaria. These hordes are at present in possession of no more than this part of their ancient country, situated towards the southwest in Bukharia, Yiva, and some other small states thereabout. In early times, the Tartars and Mongols were governed by but one sovereign who ruled over the United Nations, but after the death of Khan August, the state was dismembered. Khan Chingwais subdued the greatest number of these hordes and founded in them the Tartarian Monarchy, where he reigned according to the Christian era from the year 1204 to the year 1229. He extended his conquest from the banks of the Caspian beyond Mount Caucasus to the Euxine Sea. On the death of Chingwais, his sons and the nobles of the empire divided his conquests, and every one endeavored to enlarge what fell to his share. The most famous amongst the descendants of Shingues was Khan Bati, who towards the middle of the 13th century, by his prudence, valor, good fortune, and severity, has obtained a distinguished reputation. He settled a horde near the river Ural called Adshik by the Tartars and by others Yaik. This horde consisted of several separate sects which Bati had the address to unite. It is still called the Great Horde, and by the Russians the Golden Horde. With this horde, Bati subdued the Bulgarian Empire upon the Volga, out of whose ruins he formed the kingdoms of Kazan and Astrakhan. He made himself master of a part of the Russian Empire, a great way beyond the borders of which he penetrated, to the terror of Poland and other neighboring states. In the year 1240, the incursions of the Tartars into Siberia brought a total ruin upon the minds of that country. After him, towards the end of the 14th century, Tamerlane distinguished himself by his numerous armies, by his victories and the devastations he spread around him, everywhere, without excepting even the Tartar Hordes. The Tartars give Tamerlane the surname of Temar Afkakal, which figures Old Man of Iron or White Beard of Iron. The principal part of southern Siberia was seized on by the horde of Kurgu. Wherever the Tartars came, they not only subdued the former inhabitants, but destroyed the greatest number of them, or drove them from their temperate regions and obliged them to seek a shelter from oppression in less hospitable climes. To maintain and people the conquered provinces, it was necessary to send thither Tartar colonies, which occasioned an almost total transplantation and migration of the races of the Mongols and Tartars. It was not till the beginning of the 15th century that the Tartarian power began to give way. The Golden Horde was weakened by intestine divisions, and notwithstanding the horde of Nogais availed itself of this by increasing its people and extending its territory, yet they were often conquered by the Russians and Chinese till about the middle of the 16th century, when the arms of the Russians were completely victorious and the immense empire of the Tartars finally subverted. Tsar Ivan Vasilovich the Great, after having conquered the Tartarian kingdoms of Kazan and Astrakhan, the former in 1552 and the other in 1554, made them provinces of his empire, and proceeded to extend his conquests over Siberia, where Khan Kuchum reigned. At present, the number of independent Tartarian hordes is not great. They consist of only those that still inhabit the southwest part of the ancient Great Tartary, towards the frontiers of Persia, of India, and of Sungaria. The great horde of the Kyrgyzstans, the Bucharians, the Givenses, and the Karalpaks, the Trophmanes, the Tashkanations, or the Turkastans, and the Arabians. Besides these, there are still several hordes of Nogais Tartars near the Black Sea, which by the peace concluded between Russia and the Porte in 1774, were declared independent on the Ottoman dominion, as well as the Tartars of the Crimea and those of Bessarabia. But all these hordes are so feeble that they are obliged to seek the protection of each other, or of their neighbors, as circumstances direct. The other hordes are partly subjects and partly allies to Russia, the Ottoman Porte, the Great Mogul, China, and Persia, especially before the troubles of this last kingdom. Those hordes alone that acknowledge obedience to Russia are the object of this present undertaking. The Tartarian nations established within the Empire of Russia dwell along the northern coast of the Caspian Sea and the Euxine, the northern side of Mount Caucasus, the steppes, those vast deserts extending from the easternmost part of the river Ural to Sangaria, the whole southern side of the last mentioned river, the mountains and frontiers of Siberia towards the south, the steppes which reach from the river Tobol to the other side of the Yenisei, and lastly the deserts situated toward the middle of the Lena. It is moreover to be remarked that a considerable number of Tartar colonies are distributed among the habitations of the Russians, especially in the governments of Kazan, Orenburg, and Tobolsk. Near the Yenisei are still to be seen remnants of different people, whose manner of life and particular customs have great resemblance with those of the Tartars. But they are mistaken who imagine them to the Tartars of Krasnoyarsk. Without reckoning these last, of whom the number is but small, the Tartars taken in general are next to the Russians the most numerous people of the empire. The Tartars have been in possession of all the countries above mentioned, at least the greatest part of each, ever since the Tartarian Empire was in its splendor, and all of them abound in monuments of former power. Remains of ditches and ramparts are frequently met with, which heretofore either surrounded small towns now quite demolished, or were designed for the defense of camps, forts, or castles, the vestiges of which are often to be discovered upon the spot, as well as other traces of decayed importance. The Russians give all these ruins the name of Gorodishche, little towns demolished. Many of them are in tolerable preservation and make some figure even at present. The Flabod, or Tartarian suburb of Kazimov on the Oka, seems to have been the residence of some Khan. In the midst of the ruins of that city is a round and elevated tower called in their language Miskir, a fort or temple or building destined to devotion. Besides this, here are evidently the walls of a palace, and in one of the masarets, or burial places, is a very considerable mausoleum, all which edifices are built of hewn stone and bricks. From an Arabic inscription, we learn that the Khan of Skagali was buried there in the 962nd year of the Hejra, or the 1520th of the Christian chronology. Near Mount Caucasus are still very considerable remains of Madikar, a celebrated city of former times. In the environs of Astrakhan, the ruins of ancient Astrakhan are very visible, and the rubbish and ramparts of another respectable town still exist near Saritsan, on the left shore of the Volga. A little below the mouth of the Kama, which empties itself into the above-mentioned river, are many superb monuments of the ancient city Byganova, or Bulgari, consisting of towers, mosques, houses, and sepulchres, all built of stone or brick. The oldest epitaphs have been there more than 11 centuries, and the most modern at least 400 years. Not far from hence, on the Cherenshan, are found ruins somewhat more injured by the depredations of time. They are those of Bolimir, an ancient and very considerable city of the Bulgarians, which afterwards falling to the Tartars, they erected upon its ruins the small town of Bilyarisk. In the fortress of Kazan is a monument of the ancient Tartarian kingdom of that name. Its lofty walls are so broad that they serve at present for ramparts, the turrets of which, as well as the old palace of the Khan, are built of hewn stone. Ascending the river Kazanka, we meet with epitaphs in the strong ramparts of the old Kazan. Near the are cemeteries full of innumerable inscriptions and several sepulchral vaults. The ramparts of Sibir, the ancient capital of Tartary, are still seen about the Tobolsk upon the Irtish. The lofty walls of Tontora appear yet in the Baraba, and near the mouth of the Ural are the ditches of the city of Saraschik, not to mention a great number of other sepulchres and ruins of Siberia, and especially all those that are to be met with in the desert of Kyrgyz, which abounds in the relics of opulent cities. The constitution and political state of the Tartarian nations with respect to the Empire of Russia are essentially the same with those of the Finnish nations. The Tartars are a free people and are permitted peaceably to enjoy the constitution of their ancestors. They elect their own chiefs always from among themselves and generally out of their nobility, which consists of princes descended in a direct line from Chinggis, Bathi, and others of their ancient sovereigns who have rendered themselves famous by their great exploits. At the beginning of their subjection, they paid the crown of Russia the same tribute they had done before to their ancient Khans, but since that time they have been much relieved, and their taxes are regulated now according to circumstances and the ability of the people. The yafak, or tribute, is in general very moderate, and there are some whole settlements on them who, instead of paying tribute, perform military service in quality of Cossacks, and the hordes that are in alliance or under protection neither serve nor pay. It need only to be observed with respect to their manner of life that the wandering Tartars, as well as the stationary, have an inexpressible veneration for the customs of their ancestors. The ancient Oriental simplicity is therefore perfectly preserved among them, with its inseparable concomitants, frugality, and parsimony. Great economy is conspicuous in their manners, their habitations, their food, and their dress. Those that are rich have no train proportionate to their fortune, and the rest never incur any expense which it would be inconvenient to them to discharge. In like manner, the old national pride of the Tartars is maintained at this day in all its vigor. It is not only the great that boast of their genealogies, but even the meanest people, however destitute of education, warm their imagination with raptures on the ancient splendor of the Tartarian Empire, and often break out in wishes and ardent longings for the re-establishment of their former power, of the sincerity of which their reiterated and bloody contests with the Bashkirs are so many proofs. This is probably one chief motive why the government excludes from the magistracy and the higher ranks in the army all the stationary Mohammedan Tartars, amongst whom are men of great capacity, deficient neither in courage or understanding. As to the pagan Tartars, their perfect ignorance renders them scarcely fit for obedience, much less for command. The whole race of Tartars speak the Turuk or Turkish language, which they call the Turkestan. The Mohammedans, who learn it young, both speak and write it in a uniform and correct manner. They make use of the Arabic alphabet, and all their devotions and religious acts are in that language, though but a few of their priests speak it. Whenever they intend to write neatly, they use a pen made of a reed and a sort of Chinese ink, the composition of which is as follows. They burn a quantity of millet to a coal, and then mix it with lamp-black and gum water. The language of the Tartars is rich, flexible, and mellifluous. They speak very low and with a tone or cadence. The pagan Tartars have neither schools nor writing, for which reason their language suffers much, is considerably mixed with those of their neighbors, has degenerated into so many different dialects, and undergone such alterations that they can hardly understand the other Tartars or be understood by them. And now the next section, I'll go into a little bit of this, is called Tartars of Kazan and Orenburg. So when the Russians made themselves masters of the kingdom of Kazan and incorporated it into their empire, a great number of Tartars had been dispersed by the war, and such as had not taken arms ran in crowds to the Tartarian states, not yet subdued, whereby the kingdom of Kazan underwent a greater alteration than the other conquered countries. For the hordes of the Tartars that remained in Kazan, and those of the old inhabitants who returned afterwards to their country, were intermixed with those of the colonists from the Russian nation. The government of Kazan comprehends Permia and the provinces along the Vyatka, neither of which made any part of the ancient kingdom of Kazan. But the Tartars are at present dispersed over all the government, though the greatest number are about the environs of the city. The Tartars of this government are reckoned at above 10,000 males. They occupy two considerable flabodes, or suburbs, of the city of Kazan, one of which is embellished with two mosques built of stone, and several miskers, or very high round towers. The remains of the ancient city, the other flabode, that contains two houses of devotion, built of wood and called medcheds by the Tartars. All the other Tartars of this government dwell in separate villages as small distances from each other, and bounded by those of the Russians. In proportion as the Russians proceeded in their conquest, the vanquished Tartars became sensible of the mildness of their sway, and the security they found in the enjoyment of their civil and religious constitutions, which made them never think afterwards of a farther dispersion. Many Tartars of Kazan, in subjection to Russia, have heretofore changed their former habitations by permission of the government, and gone to live in other parts more agreeable to them. These migrations have doubtless increased the dispersion, and augmented the number of colonies in the circumjacent governments, especially in those of Orenburg, Tobolsk, and a part of Voronezh. These emigrants generally take the name of the provinces and rivers where they fix their habitations, but their mode of living and their faith are the same with those of the Tartars of Kazan, so that in this work they will be comprehended together. Care must be taken not to confound the Tartars of Orenburg Kazan with the Kyrgyzstans and the other hordes of this government who lead a pastoral life. The former bear simply the name of Tartars of Orenburg or Tartars of Usa, inhabiting the city and lines of Orenburg on the river Oral, part of them being scattered about, others assembled into particular flabodes, some inhabiting villages belonging to them, and others found in the little town of Kargala, situate on the river Sakmara, 18 verists from Orenburg. In this place is a colony of Tartars of Kazan, first settled in 1755 by the orders of Saik, their elder or chief, which so early as the year 1773 paid the tax for 2,160 males. The place is rich, having 4 medcheds or chapels and a number of pretty large stone houses, though in the country roundabout is very uncommon to meet with a house of that material. The Tartar citizens and villagers of Ufa are ancient emigrants from Kazan and tolerably numerous. In the province of Orenburg, there has been for a century past a colony which takes its name from the little river Ichkin and occupies several villages. In the government of Voronezh are Tartars of Kazan, who live in a flabode of their own near Kasimov, and other small colonies of them, as well as Astrakhan and Tobolsk dispersed amongst the Russians, but chiefly among other Tartars. The number of those of Orenburg Kazan is greater than those of Kazan properly so called, and the other dispersed colonies are not inferior to the latter. Kazan, the capital of the kingdom of that name, takes its appellation from a kettle. Kazan signifies a kettle in the Tartarian language. And I don't know if that's what this giant thing is, but this thing is pretty cool. Someone suggested it was a cauldron at one point, but who knows? These people are amazing. It's great to shed some light on this stuff. They're a big part of Russians' history, so I hope and know that a lot of Russians are digging really deep into this, hopefully literally too. I would like for some excavations and archaeologists to really start taking this seriously and start digging in places where they're, what have they got to lose? There's a lot of mines that existed as early as the 10th century and way before, and it's time to start kind of seeing what's around these things and maybe, use even mining as an excuse to maybe dig into some of these things. Who knows what lies underneath us, but I hope we figure it out. There's so many pieces to put together of these people that just have been eviscerated. And it seems like many things are, they're a very unique people and they really believe in the power of their ancient ancestry. That is a strong thing. And it's funny because even in these 1500s and 1700s, they were wanting to discover and really cope with and adapt with and live with their the power of their ancestors and kind of recover that power. And now that's what we're all trying to do, is trying to figure out who these human ancestors on Earth of ours were, what they did, what they knew, and just how cool they were. And so I hope these Tartarian tales keep shedding light on it. Spread them out to people, tell people about it, and I hope to bring you all more. So bless you all. Have a great day. Tartaria.